an elastic concept, and I don't think anyone has a particular monopoly of what it should be or is. David Cameron, when he was talking about the big society in Liverpool in July, he talked about it being about culture change, about reducing the demand for government, about focusing on the civic society, all the institutions that sit between the individual and the state. And he also cautioned that you couldn't expect government to simply withdraw and civic society to spring back into life and take over all those roles. It was up, he said, to the government to try and actually foster this strong society. It was an interesting idea that the state should help to build society. To talk about all these ideas, we have a very, very distinguished panel of people. Andrew Stunell is Parliamentary Under Secretary of State in the Department of Communities and Local Government. He was one of the team of 4 people who helped to negotiate this whole coalition, so probably understands it better than pretty much anyone else. At DCLG, he's in charge of faith, race, cohesion, housing and regeneration policy, and the big society, so pretty much everything really. David Godber is Deputy Chief Executive of the Design Council. The Design Council have become very, very interested in the big society and are doing a lot of work on the ground to do with it, so they can give us a kind of cold face view, as can Jan Tallis, who is the Chief Executive Officer of School Home Support, and she has been a prolific generator and runner of social enterprises and charities. So again, she can tell us what it's really like on the ground. So just to get it started, here are some of the things that people talk about as being the big society. So some people talk about the reform of public services. They talk about the free schools programme or police accountability in elections. Other people talk about the building up of civic society, so the deregulation of activities done by voluntary groups, the sort of things that Lord Young was talking about the other day. People talk about trying to capitalise charities, they're setting up a big society bank. Other people have talked about getting volunteers to do public services, be it running libraries or having more special constables. Another element of the big society seems to be localism. People talk about the sort of reforms that are happening at DCLG to hand over control of planning law back to communities, at the end of the Audit Commission and the scrapping of all the apparatus that grips local government. Another type of thing that people sometimes talk about as being part of big society is to do with behaviour change, the famous nudges, everything about helping people to do things for themselves without the state, be it smart metering of your electricity or clever use of charging and pricing. And the last sort of thing that people have tended to talk about as being the big society is reform of welfare and social housing and the attempt to end dependency. Now all of this, of course, is happening against a very difficult background of really deep cuts in public spending. And there are many, many other challenges facing the building of the big society. So I think if you don't mind, David, we might start with you and you tell us a bit about what you're actually doing on the ground.
I'm possibly the unlikely panel member. I'm ex-industry, I should declare that from moment one. And what the hell has design got to do with the Design Council? Well, I think I should probably just give you a potted version. I will keep this to my 5-minute piece. Set up in '44 by Churchill to get Britain going, and actually it was really about driving industry and new products and services and consumerism. But for us, big society, we've just run a whole series of seminars with Matt Way, across a whole series of issues: criminal justice system reform, localisation services, and so on. And that material's available. But really, what we had to do was set a context. And that set this out very well, that he sort of perceived that there was a lack of trust in politics, there were some long-standing, seemingly intractable social problems, and unprecedented challenges to public finances. And that's really where I suppose we came in with the programme that we've been running for the last literally year and a half, almost before all this sort of came to the fore, called Public Services by Design. And what we've done, basically, where rubber hits the road, is put service designers, very leading-edge people, and vanguard kind of design fraternity, into a range of public services, a homelessness service in Lewisham with Barry Quirk, the local authority, the North East Regional Improvements Partnership to look at adult social care, and a whole broad spectrum of these localised services to see what could be done to literally strip clean, reassemble, become citizen-centred, and see what could be achieved. And the results are remarkable. From an industry background, I'm used to returns on investment of 1 to 1.0 something as a sort of EBIT or something like that. And actually, an independent evaluation has just come back at 26 to 1. And I'd like to think that it was the fact that these people are so brilliant and magicians and design is absolutely fantastic. What it's really telling me is there's such a massive opportunity and the legacy systems that are in place are perhaps so embedded that actually there's a need to just get straight past all the Kaizen continuous improvement stuff and actually literally strip, clean and reassemble these programs, these services from a citizen point of view. And actually I think what we've been doing is really trying to get to the hub of what this is about. And actually we've come down to the fact that the word people comes into this a lot. For people to be more involved in their communities, for people to be able to contribute more effectively, and for people to be better able to shape government policy. And actually, by going to the front line, we find a lot of support for these kinds of approaches. They're quite radical. And what we've been trying to do, because I think this whole big society, I'll say rhetoric, but the thinking of big society versus the doing of big society, which I think is yet to really come about. I think I'm really looking for the CSR to compartmentalize a whole series of budgets that will actually go to the front line, go to those local services, and actually be kind of past the Sercos and Capitals and the traditional and big service providers. We've been trying to find out what the sort of must-do-wells of this really is. And we've kind of come to a whole series of, a short list. Enroll the right resources from minute one. That's got to happen for this to really kind of be effective. Provide an environment where creativity can thrive and actually you can actually include people. The whole inclusion agenda has got to be there. And actually, to make services better for people has to be at the core before you've even started sort of gateway zero. So to make sure the customer and end user is at the heart of all the decisions. To provide clear rules of engagement, it's still quite foggy, it's still a bit of a quest as to how this is going to happen, how public sector procurement is going to actually allow the funding to flow, if you like, to that front line. Sort out this public sector procurement for the little guys, I think that's an important piece moving forwards. Get rid of the red tape. I mean, actually, lots of new organisations will spring up. They're going to have to get through the Charities Commission. They're going to have to get through FRS1, SORT 24, governance, treasurers. All of these kinds of things are going to have to be delivered. Identify and provide clear leadership. It's not good enough just to kind of tell them, you're on, it's you. There's going to have to be ongoing support, mentored support, coaching. Otherwise, they can just fail in a heartbeat, as any startup is subject to, even in the private sector. So I think there's an awful lot to do beyond the thinking that's going on. I think CSR is probably a milestone in that journey. One of the questions I was asked was which functions could be taken on by big society. So I put this to my team, and actually they started to come up with some quite radical things. And actually we came to a very interesting question. Actually, it's much easier to ask which functions can't be taken on by big society. Because actually the vast majority can. Defence, territorial army, policing, special constables. One of the guys threw at me child protection services, and actually somebody else shouts out NSPCC Dove project. So actually there is so much out there in the landscape that is good and logical. The need for new startups versus the need to foster the growth in those entities that are already doing a fantastic job in a quiet and humble way, but could do an awful lot more with a little bit more in terms of investment and so on, I think is really where we're going with this. So I think the other parallel I'll draw and close on, so it'd be nice to have a sort of longer debate really. Design went through a journey from the 1800s from Christopher Dresser, and there's a whole history of product design that you'll all know and see in visual forms. Everything you sat on was designed, some of it quite badly, I see. But design was done to people, and then design, by celebrity designs was done for people. Then design's gone through this sort of co-creation phase of with people, and now design is by people. I think this big society now needs to reverse that. This is about public services and the kind of service offering by people, with people, for people, and to people who perhaps aren't so fortunate. I think we just need to reverse that lexicon and nomenclature slightly. I think that'll kick us off.
That'll kick us off for that. I wonder, Andrew, I know that you have to leave us about past, so I wonder if we can turn to you next. I'm particularly interested in how you see what the Liberal Democrats take on the big society, because this is something that Cameron has talked about a lot, but these principles are not exactly antithetical to what the Liberal Democrats do.
No, far from it. Well, thanks for the opportunity to say some stuff, and my apologies that I'm going to have to go before I hear all the contributions. No, I mean, big society isn't a phrase that I used before the election, but the interesting thing is that it's extremely similar to ideas which the Liberal Democrats first put into the public domain back in the 70s, which we call community politics. I have to say big society is a much more elegant expression of it than community politics. in terms of, apart from anything else, it's a smaller headline and shorter headline, so it gets a bit more coverage than community politics ever did. But what community politics was about was giving local communities the power and the responsibility to manage their own affairs. It was very much seeing society as a bottom-up institution and not a top-down institution. Now, community politics also developed what Liberal Democrats have done electorally over the years in terms of keeping in touch with elected representatives, giving people a chance to feed back to their elected representatives. And it turned out to be amazingly successful electorally, and at times when we were in single figures of polling, allowed us to gain large numbers of council seats. And there's a sort of what I might call electoral Darwinism at work. I mean, if it doesn't work, when you try something electorally and it doesn't work, you stop doing it, or anyway you don't get elected. If it does work, you do it some more and it expands. And of course, what also has happened is that a much higher level of community engagement in the democratic system is now a prerequisite for success in most areas of local government. And you see other political parties circulating regular newsletters and things, not even at election time in some amazing circumstances. So there is a change. That, if you like, is the lasting legacy of community politics as it was in the 70s. But the other part of it has always been there. And so it's been really interesting to have the opportunity to play it big with the coalition government. Calling it big society doesn't make any difference to what we're trying to achieve, which is a fundamental transfer of power from central government back to local government, and beyond that to local communities and to individuals as well. I hope nobody has been stalking me round fringe meetings, because I've said this at every fringe meeting I've attended. We've moved in society, in government, over the last 3 or 4 decades to a situation where, as near as anything, everything is either compulsory or prohibited. What we're trying to do is push those two wide apart so that there is an opportunity for local communities, local councils, individuals to actually make their own choices about what they do, about the service delivery that they have, about the kind of society that they live in. And of course that takes an awful lot of effort at the top. I have to say civil servants don't really get it, and I had a meeting with civil servants quite soon after we moved into office, and I explained about localism, which is kind of the catchword that goes with this. Incidentally, the Secretary of State is going around the country saying his 3 words are localism, localism, localism. I do get asked by the media whether I agree with Eric, and I say no, I don't agree with Eric. I think there should be a 4th word. And they, right, notebooks out, what's the 4th word? It's localism. We are all absolutely committed to this localism agenda, and it is going to happen. But I have to say, the civil servants, when we had the talk, one of the questions was, well, how will people learn about best practice? And I said, well, if you think that somebody in Sutton who wants to know the best way of doing things and what Croydon is doing, waits to get a memo from CLG. I mean, there's a mindset that thinks that everything has to go up, be endorsed, approved, and come down again before we can do it. And that isn't true at all. We can do it sideways, and we can do it in every dimension that you care to mention. So there's going to have to be some eye-opening at the top level among civil servants, government departments and so on. But it's happening. The Health White Paper is interesting. There is oversight and scrutiny of health and public health transferred to local government. The flow of funds from CLG itself, just one government department, 115 different funding streams to councils, each with their own conditions that you can receive them on. And when I saw that, they said, don't worry, Minister, we are making a 15% reduction in the number this year. So I said, that's what, about 94 or 90? Yes, Minister, that's right, about 94 or 95. Anyway, in 2 years' time, it will be 3. 3 different channels only, and it will then be up to local authorities having got all the money, to decide their own priorities on what they want to do and how they do it.
What are the three?
I beg your pardon?
What are the three?
I don't know if they'll have the same name as they've got now, and I mean, they'll be basically the revenue support grant. There'll be something which will be something like an area-based grant, and there may be something which is something like a supporting people grant. But don't hold me to the titles or the exact definitions. But basically, everything else, we put the emergency budget actually broke down some silos and already has started that process. And incidentally, for those who may have something to say about this, we did make quite sure that the reduction in budgets in CLG itself and in its quangos was a higher percentage, not by very much, but a higher percentage than the reduction to local authorities. So we're making, as far as we can, trying to make sure, just to pick up the point from a moment ago, that I'm not sure the CSR is going to channel huge sums of money to what you would like to see, but we are trying at least to make sure that we don't shrink huge sums of money from what you would like to see, and that's certainly there. But I also agree with the point that's made that you have to have the capacity at grassroots level to take on the opportunity which we're making available. And I've been teaching my civil servants 2 new words, which I don't suppose you all know, but unless you've been one of my other fringe meetings. And the two words are Marple and Offerton. Okay, Marple is the place in my constituency which has got, it's got an opera society, it's got a cricket club, it's got a choir, it's got everything that you can have one of, it's got at least one. WI, Guides, Scouts, Sea Scouts. You know, you could spend, as an MP, you could spend the whole of your time in Marple going to things which are organised by civic society in Marple. 2.5 miles away, Offerton hasn't got any of those things. And the challenge is, fine, we can be pretty sure that we can give more power and responsibility and decision taking and all that kind of thing to Marple, and they make good use of it. That's fine. Well, we've got the challenge of making sure that we give the capacity, the capability to my constituents in Offerton, that they can also get upskilled and get the imagination, the innovation, the enthusiasm which will allow them to do it. And that is clearly a big push, a big ask. We're going to have the big society bank which will be able to underpin some of this. We're certainly going to have the localism bill which is going to do a lot of it. And we're going to have a lot more information transparency, because even my people in Marple won't necessarily have the slightest idea about how much the school spends, how much the health service spends, about how much the police spend, about how much the DWP spends, about how much any government agency spends in that area. What we need to be working towards, clearly, is a much more holistic look at the way that we give services. One can look at it at the community level, or you can look at it at the family level. My family example is the household with 2 or 3 children. One's got special educational needs, one's going on probation, parent on benefits. You have a meeting because there's a safeguarding issue for the child. There'll be 12 people sitting around the table for the safeguarding issue. And when you think about it, there's going to be, behind them are going to be 12 auditors making sure they're spending the money right. And behind that, 12 bureaucracies and streams, all directed at fixing that child. And I'm exaggerating here, but basically you could send them to Florida for the rest of their life and the kids to eat, and it would be cheaper than what we're doing in trying to make that society whole, that family whole in that society. We've really got to kind of rip the whole thing up and really start again with a much more rounded and holistic approach to it. Now, of course, it's not all going to happen in 6 months. I'm not an idiot. And I don't think so anyway, and there's a lot of very hard work and thinking to be done. We're making a start, and it will be very interesting and I hope productive to get the feedback from people who've been there, done it, bought the t-shirt, about how we can scale up the successes and have the courage to allow diversity and to accept some failures and some mishaps and mistakes, and not get trapped back into the view that the only people who can ever take a sensible decision about anything is a minister in Whitehall. And in case you needed any reinforcement of the fact that that's a bad idea, if this all fails, it would be me taking all those decisions. So, you know, you need to make sure that they are actually taken right down. I haven't even said anything about mutuals and social enterprise. I haven't said anything about 12 other things, but I expect you want me to stop.
Brilliant. That's a very good tour of all the different things you're doing. Sounds like a very exciting project. I admire your attempt to do yourself out of a job, which is always good. Jan, tell us about what you're doing.
I'm Chief Executive of School Home Support and a KIVO trustee board member. KIVO is a professional body for chief executives of voluntary organisations. We've got about 2,000 members who've been doing this stuff for hundreds of years, actually. The Big Society sounds great, and I'm quite excited by listening to Andrew. It's the first time I'm getting to get a grip of what this really looks like, because we're all concerned about, so how does it play out? The theory is fantastic. What's the practicals going to be? And, you know, hearing about Marple, one of my notes was here that most communities aren't like Ambridge. You know, we're not all going to run our local shops very easily. But civil action is happening on the ground, and it has been for a very long time, and there's loads of it around schools, and there's loads of it around, you know, faith groups and lots of other things. So one of the things that we've really got to hold on to is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I think there's a really issue before us now between the statement that councils and local authorities and others are like rabbits in the headlights at the moment. They're so panicked by the spending review that they are just not making decisions. And therefore the likes of SHS, we have to make decisions 4 or 5 months before we're going to close down a service. If we don't know that we're going to find some way of funding that in the future. So you could end up decimating half of your current civil society, big society, because of not being very clear about where you're going in the future. Now SHS works in areas of deprivation mainly, with kids in school who are having trouble at school because of their home circumstances. So we do lots of stuff around, you know, the acting out, the behaviour in the classroom. Very rarely a child kicks off for no good reason, and often it's to do with the home. And so we start from the school base, and we try and work to overcome the barriers that get in the way of that child engaging and getting the best in their education. And that often means long-term support for some very chaotic families. But it's a very cheap way of going about things, because that early intervention, that keeping the child in a fit place to be able to be in school, to not need to be excluded, is quite, well, the financial return on investment, we had a piece of work done, and our social return on investment, I wasn't at all surprised by your numbers, ours was 1 to 21, so, you know, it costs a lot less to do it right at the beginning. And you will know that 50% of our prison population were excluded from school, so that's high-end stuff, cost extent. And I think that the challenge for us as a third sector and to local authorities and other commissioners of our services is that we engage in the strategic development, not just as funders. So we want to talk to you before you make your decisions about how you're going to have one of those. Actually, we've probably got some really good ideas about how you might get better value for your money by doing it in a different sort of way. And I think, you know, in some areas of the third sector, we've got to step up to the mark. We're not all wonderful, and you will come across many whingers who think that their charity is the one that's got to be saved, never mind the decimation that's going on elsewhere. You've got to start being very clever about seeing those outcomes, seeing the proof of it, and when you're commissioning, knowing what value for money that it is that you're going to be getting. But as I say, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Some of the smaller, very local organisations haven't had the money to invest in long-term research. We can't afford to put in very sophisticated monitoring and evaluation systems. You've got to be able to support us to do that along the period so we can grow and develop. And one of the great benefits that SHS has had, we've had major investment from the Private Equity Foundation. And we've had that money, £1 million over 3 years, but alongside that, we've had some great support from the private equity community. So we've worked with McKinsey's to look at our marketing strategy, and we thought that, you know, they were asking who do we sell to? Well, we said primary schools and nurseries and secondary schools and special needs schools and people variants. They said, no, try again. Who are you selling to? And it turns out, after a workshop, that we're selling to the community head teacher who wants her school to be part of this big society and for things to happen in the school. We're selling to the aspirational teacher who wants to make a difference to her school, to turn it around, to engage that bottom 20% of kids who aren't going to get engaged the other way. We're selling to the neurofen teacher who everything's going wrong and they don't know what to do next, so have one of you. So it's really interesting for us to learn from that. And we've had Deloitte's have helped us with thinking about our financial procedures. We need support to be able to step up to scale. That's how you scale us up. It's not just chucking stuff at us, it's chucking and some expertise. And I think in the business community, there's plenty out there who want to come and help us do that. So be strategic about engaging those. And I think that looking at when we're looking at infrastructure, I did have a bit of a wobble when you were talking about localism. And I was in local politics in the late 1980s and in London Road, Newham, next door to Tower Hamlets, where the Liberal Council set up so much infrastructure locally. There was lots and lots of little bits of everything that starts to have a bureaucracy, because you then start to have meetings to talk to people to have meetings about the meetings. And so you've got to be really careful about how you support that local infrastructure. I want to say that, I am really concerned about some of the innovation that's gone on in public services as well. And in Stockpool, you've got parent support advisors in many schools who work with those difficult families who are challenging. And I can tell you in one local authority I have been engaged with, their top 20 chaotic families cost just the local authority, never mind the police and health service and everybody else, £5.5 million, right? 20 families. We served 20,000 families last year, and our budget's 5.5 million. So I think if the money to pay for parent support advisors is coming to an end in March, just letting it go without taking account of the positive impact it has had, that other social return on investment, I'd be concerned. And we're now being asked by Greater Manchester Council and other councils, can you take this on? Because this is big society. Well, can we take this on with no money and deal with 2p? No, we probably can't. But we're very interested in supporting those innovative services that have been put in place, looking at that, doing them differently, and we'd like a conversation of, is there a way we can take it on that's not just going to decimate the rest of the SHS service? So big society, it sounds really good in theory, really concerned about the practicalities, but quite excited being into the debate.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jan. So we have a little bit of time for, I think we've got about half an hour. So we've got some time for questions and answers and a bit of a discussion. Andrew, I know you have to go. Thank you so much for being with us. It's a pleasure. But if you could just say who you are and where you're from as well, would be quite good as well. So there's lots of different sort of themes that have been thrown up by the discussion so far. And just talked about what the government are doing, kind of the issue around charities in a difficult funding environment, and the stuff around redesigning services. So there's a lot of different places one could start. If I can sort of get the ball rolling, it seems like there's a bit of a problem in terms of getting the big society off the ground against the backdrop of, because there's so much government money in the charity sector now, as that drains away, that is going to be a very tricky backdrop to do this. Now, there is new money coming in from the government of, I don't know much about this, but they've taken all the deposits which are lying dormant in bank accounts, and that's funding this big society back to the tune, I think, I can't remember how much it is a year.
It's about 40 million, it's a fraction of what's currently in the sector in contracts.
Yeah. So this sector is going to take quite a big knock to it in. You've sort of mentioned corporates sort of giving support to the charity sector. What are the other sort of things that leading charities are doing to sort of cope with this?
Well, if you've got a big enough name, you do tin rattling. Mm-hmm. That's but that's quite difficult for someone like SHS, where we've got to tell you what we do takes a bit of time. It's not just one thing; it's this collection of things which makes that difference. And so that's really quite hard to get the message over. But we're trying, and we're looking to do more of the sort of. So I've got a strategic plan that I wrote in 2008 that was moving us towards a social enterprise. When I took over then 5 years ago, we earned from commissions and from school fees about 70% of what our income is, and we got 30% for charitable places. And the idea by 2013 was to move that to an 80-20. Last year we looked at this and said we're going back 50-50.
Go the other way, yeah.
It's just not, because, and you know, there's a bit in the sector that says why should charity subsidise what ought to be statutory services, and you know, you can understand that. But my answer is because actually we were doing it 25 years ago before it was a statutory service. The fact that some good ideas were taken on board does not take away the need for that basic service in the first one. So we will do all we can to raise it. But I'm facing, we're in 280 schools, and next year half of them we contract with individually to schools, and those schools are the ones with the really innovative heads who know and want to make the difference. They've found a bit of money in their budget to be able to pay for it. But the other half are through local authority contracts, and we're likely to lose half of that.
I'm an economist by background, so I kind of tend to look at the numbers, and I take the fact that this new money, albeit a smidgen, is going to be available, but I rather think that the art of the practical is going to nick it in about a heartbeat, because there are four things going on at the moment for me, and actually one of them was alluded to actually with Andrew. We're killing stuff, we're keeping stuff, we're scaling stuff, and we're starting stuff. Well, actually, we're killing stuff and we're keeping some stuff. We're not really yet scaling anything, and we haven't really started anything new yet, apart from kind of theorising of what we'd like it to be. And in that transition, there is, for me, going to be an absolutely colossal transition cost. You mentioned Tupi, but actually, if we look at what's going on with the RDAs, if we look at what's going on with the Quangos, if we look at what's going on with local authorities and CSR, it's going to be an enormous issue of this transition and shift. And I rather think an enormous amount of that money is already a committed contingent liability yet to be determined, that is actually going to mean the discretionary spend against this activity is going to be far, far smaller than people think it's going to be. In terms of the money available that's quoted versus what's actually going to hit the ground. I think it's going to be a big shift. And that's the thing that concerns me at the moment. You know, is big society a rhetoric for a massive reduction in public spending? Can that reduction in public spending, and there's sort of, you go back to sort of Reagan years, to take all public spending away, gang culture moves in, it's a very extreme generalist example. But actually, there is a need for some very specific thought about how this is going to be done well. And it's going to be, I think, again, this startup versus support of the going concern, and those that are doing a really good job already, again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
But the lead-in time,
huge.
You're going to lose.
If the transition money is soaked, you're not going to have any real genuine activity for 12 to 18 months, I imagine.